Let's be real. You've been strong for so long, you've cried behind locked doors. You've reread old messages, trying to decode their silence. You've bent your boundaries, compromised your values, and shrunk your needs just to keep someone barely alive. But the more you gave, the less you received. And finally, one day, something inside you snapped. Not with anger, not with drama, but with a quiet, sacred decision. I'm done. And that's when it happens. Just when your heart starts beating steadily again, just when you no longer obsess over their social media, just when you've begun to taste your own peace, they come back. They always come back. Not with accountability, not with real transformation, but with what I call the final dirty trick. And trust me, it's not love, it's not healing, it's control repackaged as vulnerability. So let me ask you, have you ever noticed how they only miss you once you've stopped missing them? Why does their awakening always align with your healing? Why do their sweetest words show up only after your silence has spoken louder than all your tears ever could? Here's the truth. Most people won't tell you. Avoidants don't fear losing you. They fear losing access to you. They don't grieve the connection. They grieve the control. And when your detachment breaks the cycle, when your nervous system finally says, I'm no longer available for emotional chaos, they panic. Not because they've changed, but because you have. And in their world, that's a threat. You see, the biggest misconception, and maybe you've believed this too, is thinking that their return means they finally realized your worth. It's a beautiful fantasy, right? That your absence taught them a lesson, that your silence triggered their growth, that maybe this time it's real. But that's the trap. That's the illusion that pulls so many women back into the same story with a new script. Same actor, different costume. This is where the pain sharpens because it feels so real. The words are perfect. The timing is emotional. The moment feels cinematic, but it's not a love story. It's an ego ritual. And in today's video, I'm going to walk you through exactly how this plays out, why it's designed to hurt you more than help you, and how to recognize and resist it with calm, grounded strength. This is not just a survival guide. This is a reclaiming of your power. This is where we bring stoicism into love. This is where you stop reacting and start choosing. We're going to dissect their return, not from a place of bitterness, but from emotional clarity, because once you understand the game, it stops feeling personal. Once you see the pattern, you stop falling for potential. And once you embody calm detachment, your power becomes unshakable. So stay with me until the end, because by the final minute of this video, you're not just going to understand what's happening. You're going to feel it in your body. You'll be able to name it, claim it, and never be pulled into it again. This one hurts, but it frees you. And when you rise from this kind of pain, you don't just heal, you transform. And that's when you become untouchable. Ready? Let's begin. 1. The unexpected comeback. They always come back, but not in the way you hoped. Not with a changed heart, not with accountability, not with an offering of real love. They come back with what looks like warmth, sounds like growth, and feels like the moment you waited for all along. But underneath their perfect timing lies one thing: strategy. This is the comeback rooted not in love, but in panic. A reaction to your detachment, a last-minute emotional stunt disguised as transformation. And it catches you off guard because for the first time in so long, you weren't looking. You weren't scrolling through their page. You weren't rereading your last text. You were healing. You were putting your life back together. And in that quiet progress, you became unrecognizable to them. No longer the woman who chased, who cried, who pleaded. You were becoming immune, and that immunity is their emergency. So what do? They reach out with intensity, masked as sincerity. The messages come wrapped in nostalgia. I've been thinking about you lately. I didn't realize what I had until it was gone. You were the only one who ever really saw me. On the surface, it sounds like reflection, like accountability, like maybe, just maybe, they finally get it. But pause. Ask yourself this. Why now? Why not when you were falling apart? Why not when you begged them to meet you halfway? Why only after your silence became louder than your love? This isn't coincidence. It's a calculated re-entry, and it's designed to make you question everything you've healed from. The timing is never innocent. It comes at the edge of your breakthrough. Right when you started sleeping better. Right when your nervous system began to self-regulate. Right when their memory no longer felt sharp. That's when they strike. Because avoidants don't know how to handle true detachment. They thrive in ambiguity, in that space where you still hope, still wonder, still wait. But the moment you pull back, truly pull back, their ego goes into survival mode. Not because they lost your love, but because they lost access to your vulnerability. And to someone with an avoidant attachment style, vulnerability is power, it's leverage, it's the rope they pull on when they want to feel relevant. So when that rope goes slack, they panic. And what do they use to pull you back in? Their final dirty trick, faux vulnerability, emotional language that sounds like intimacy, but is actually bait. They don't miss you, they miss your need for them. They don't regret what they did, they regret not being able to use your compassion anymore. This is the moment most women fall. Not because they're weak, but because the words are so precise. Because the fantasy you built in your head finally shows up, except it's not real. It's rehearsed. And when you've starved for clarity for so long, even a crumb of it can taste like a feast. That's why their messages feel profound. That's why their voice sounds softer. That's why their apology makes you want to believe. Because deep down, you still remember the nights you cried at 2 a.m., praying they would care. And now that they suddenly do, it feels divine. But Stoicism teaches us to pause when we're emotionally activated, to examine not just the message, but the motive, to ask, who does this serve? Why now? Is this about love or about disruption? Is this connection or control? You see, a love stoic woman doesn't react to words alone. She observes patterns. And the pattern here is clear. They show up not when they're ready to love you right, but when they fear they've lost the ability to manipulate your emotions, because your peace is now louder than your pain. Your silence speaks volumes. And they're not used to that. They're used to the version of you who over-explained, over-gave, and over-forgave. But that version of you is gone. That version of you evolved. And now you're dangerous to someone who only felt powerful when you were uncertain. So they make a move, not from growth, but from fear, not to build something new, but to rebuild their ego. And you feel it even if you can't name it. There's a slight tremble in their tone, a desperate undertone, a frequency of panic beneath the calm, because they can't understand how you slipped away so quietly, so completely without warning. They expected you to orbit forever. They expected your heart to stay tethered. And now that it's not, they spiral, not in grief, but in confusion, not in sorrow, but in strategy. This is not about redemption. This is about reaction. A stoic lens teaches you to see through the fog, to observe not just what is being said, but what is being provoked. And if you listen carefully, you'll notice their words aren't meant to nurture you. They're meant to unlock you. They want access, not connection. They want reassurance, not relationship. So before you respond, before you slip back into old hope, ask yourself this. If they truly changed, why didn't that change happen in your absence? Why did it require your silence to trigger it? Why didn't they return sooner with action, not poetry? That's the test. That's the proof. Real change doesn't need your presence to grow. It happens in solitude, quietly, humbly, consistently. And when someone returns only after they feel your detachment, it's not because they finally saw your value. It's because they finally felt your boundary. And that's when the manipulation begins, wrapped in softness, dressed in emotional intelligence. But it's not real. It's a mirror reflecting your old desires. And if you mistake that reflection for reality, you'll fall for the fantasy one more time. Love Stoic philosophy reminds us, your worth is not proven by who returns. It's proven by what you no longer allow. So when the avoidant makes their move, your power is not in how beautifully you respond, but in how calmly you don't. Because that calmness is not passive. It's strength. It's the evidence of healing. It's the clearest sign that they no longer control the pace of your heartbeat, that you're no longer addicted to breadcrumbs, that you no longer see their silence as a challenge to decode, but as a red flag to honor. And in that calm, something else happens. They realize the power dynamic has flipped. You no longer fear their absence. You no longer chase their presence. And that shift terrifies them, not because they lost love, but because they lost control. That's what the unexpected comeback reveals. Not love, not longing, but a desperate need to reestablish dominance over a woman who no longer needs them to feel whole. So before you let their words sink in, remember what wasn't said when you were breaking. Remember who they were when you needed them most. Remember the empty space you had to fill with your own strength. And ask yourself, are you really ready to abandon all that growth for a performance they've timed to perfection? Or will you choose to remain still, steady, sovereign? Will you choose your calm over their chaos? Will you choose truth over temptation? Because this is only part one of the trick, the beginning of the final game, the moment they knock on a door they never thought you'd close. And how you answer, or if you answer, changes everything. Stoicism reminds us, peace is not a response to love. It's a response to self-respect. And your ability to stay grounded when chaos reappears is your loudest declaration yet. I no longer break for the same storm twice. 2. Weaponizing the words you once begged to hear. They remember everything, every word you once wished they would say, every moment you sat in silence, staring at your phone, praying for something, anything that felt like care. And now, after months of emotional neglect, they suddenly find the exact vocabulary that makes your breath catch. I've been thinking about you a lot. I didn't realize how much you meant to me until you were gone. You were the only one who really saw me. The precision isn't accidental. It's psychological, strategic. Because avoidants may not know how to give secure love, but they're masters at emotional observation. They don't need to understand their own hearts to manipulate yours. They just need to echo the dreams you whispered during your weakest moments. And that's exactly what this part of the cycle is about. Weaponizing vulnerability, not their vulnerability, yours. Because they've watched you break, they've watched you hope, they've seen you swallow your dignity for the crumbs they casually tossed your way. And even if they pretended not to care, they were watching, storing, studying. And now that you finally stopped begging, finally stopped chasing, finally stopped adjusting your needs to meet their comfort, they strike not with love, but with emotionally charged language that mirrors the exact kind of connection you always wanted from them. It's not random, it's bait. And the bait is your past pain. Most people think manipulation looks like gaslighting or cruelty, but the most dangerous form is this: using tenderness as a tool, using empathy as a hook, using your former desire for closeness as a weapon to re-enter your heart. And because they sound authentic, because they appear open, because they say all the right things, it triggers your most vulnerable self, the part that still wants to believe in their potential, the part that remembers how badly you needed to hear these words 6 months ago. But a love stoic knows the truth. Words are cheap, and timing is everything. Where was this insight when you were screaming into the silence? Where was this softness when you were emotionally starving? Where was this realization when you stayed up all night rewriting text messages trying to figure out what you did wrong? The answer is simple. It wasn't there because they didn't need to say it. You were still available, still emotionally entangled, still trying, still hoping, still theirs. But now that you're emotionally distant, now that your nervous system no longer reacts to their absence, now that you've started to choose peace over performance, that's when they feel the urgency. Not because they're scared of losing you, but because they're scared of losing the version of themselves that existed through your validation. You are their mirror, their emotional audience, their invisible ego supply, and when that supply shuts down, they don't grow. They panic. So what do? They return with lines they think will crack your armor. They don't offer behavior change. They offer hope. And that hope is what hurts, because it taps into the child inside you who still thinks love can fix people, who still thinks words mean something if they're spoken in the right tone, who still believes this might be the moment everything turns around. But if you zoom out, if you breathe through the urge to respond, if you apply stoicism to the situation, you'll see it clearly. It's not love, it's survival for them, not for you. This is their version of self-protection, their way of maintaining control. They don't care how much it costs you emotionally, as long as they don't feel invisible. And what's so twisted about this part of the cycle is how much it looks like healing, how much it sounds like a turning point. It's a performance that even they start to believe. But the reality is, people don't change when they're rewarded with your energy. They change when they have to sit in the discomfort of losing access to you. True accountability isn't triggered by your silence. It's sustained in your absence. And most avoidants aren't looking to sustain anything. They're looking for confirmation that you still care, that your boundary was temporary, that your strength was conditional. And if they can get you to soften even slightly, they feel powerful again. Because the game was never about love. It was about influence, about emotional leverage, about being able to tug on your heartstrings just enough to keep you in orbit. And when you fall for this trick, you're not entering a new chapter. You're stepping back into the same pattern, the same dance, the same slow destruction of your self-trust. That's why love Stoic principles are so important here. Because Stoicism doesn't teach you to suppress your feelings. It teaches you to examine them, to ask, does this serve me? Does this reflect consistency? Is this aligned with the version of myself I'm becoming or the one I've outgrown? And if the answer is no, then no matter how poetic their message, no matter how soft their tone, no matter how much your heart stirs, your answer remains stillness. Because stillness is your new power. Not silence to punish them, not distance as a tactic, but calm detachment as a declaration that you will no longer engage in emotional games disguised as growth. That you will no longer confuse emotional language with emotional maturity. That you will no longer sell your peace for the fantasy of someone else's potential. You've already done that. And where did it lead you? Back to overthinking, back to overgiving, back to the version of you who doubted herself every time they pulled away again. And if you go back now, it will hurt more. Because this time you'll have known better. This time you'll have seen the manipulation for what it is and chosen to ignore it. This time it won't just be heartbreak, it'll be shame, regret, a betrayal of the strength you worked so hard to build. And that's why this trick cuts so deep, because it weaponizes everything you once prayed for, because it feels like redemption but functions like relapse. Because it cloaks ego in emotional vulnerability and watches you fall for it. But not this time. You're not the same woman you were before. You've seen the cycle, you've named the game, and now you choose peace. You choose self-respect. You choose not to respond, not out of pettiness, but out of power. Because you finally see that real love doesn't arrive in desperation. It arrives in consistency, in alignment, in someone who doesn't need to lose you to see your worth. And when you meet manipulation with neutrality, when you respond to fake depth with real discernment, when you say nothing at all, that's the loudest no you'll ever speak. And if this video has hit a nerve, if you're starting to feel that clarity settle in your body, do something right now to anchor it. Like this video, drop a number 1 in the comments if this message resonated with your journey, and hit that subscribe button because we're not done, not even close. In the next part, I'll show you how their panic turns to projection and how they flip the script to make you feel like the villain. It gets darker, but you'll get wiser. And the next time they try to weaponize your hope, you'll know exactly how to protect it. Stay grounded. Stay sovereign. This is Love Stoic in action. 3. The ego behind the apology. What happens when you don't melt at their apology? When you hear the emotional words, the teary voice, the "I was so blind" confessions, and your body doesn't react the way it used to. That's when the apology starts to shift. That's when it starts sounding a little less like remorse and a lot more like ego dressed in emotion. You see, for an avoidant, your detachment doesn't trigger transformation. It triggers insult. They don't reflect and ask, how did I hurt this person? They wonder, how dare she stop caring? Because in their world, emotional control is currency. And when your silence becomes louder than their excuses, when your peace holds stronger than their theatrics, their apology becomes a weapon, a tool to test if you're still emotionally accessible. They need to know, do I still matter to her? Does she still think about me? Can I still shake her confidence? Because your silence, your calm, unbothered, sovereign silence, represents their worst fear, irrelevance. And that fear isn't about missing your presence, it's about mourning the power they used to feel through your pain. That's why the apology comes, not out of guilt, but out of need. A need to reestablish ego dominance, to feel seen again, validated again, needed again. And if their sweet words don't hook you, they pivot. Suddenly, they're not the remorseful one, they're the victim. I guess I didn't matter to you after all. So that's it? You're just done? Wow, you moved on fast. Do you see it now? How quickly the apology flips? How fragile the sorrow becomes when it's not received with instant forgiveness? This isn't emotional maturity. This is emotional manipulation. And it's not always conscious. Avoidants don't sit around planning to deceive you, but they are deeply wired to protect their sense of control. And when that control slips through their fingers, their nervous system responds with panic. So they do what worked in the past. They trigger your empathy, they cry, they confess, they say the exact thing you always wished they would. But it's not real change. It's reactivity. It's a reflex. Because in their mind, you were never supposed to stop trying. You were never supposed to stop hurting. You were never supposed to stop reaching out. Your healing was supposed to be temporary, performative, just enough to get their attention. But now that it's real, now that you're actually unreachable, the game collapses, and they can't tolerate that. So the apology becomes a performance, not to repair, but to reclaim, not to make amends, but to measure impact. How much do I still affect her? How deeply does she still feel me? Can I still bend her boundaries with the right words? It's not healing. It's a test. And a stoic woman sees that. A love stoic doesn't confuse expression with evolution. She knows that true remorse is quiet. It doesn't need a performance. It doesn't need an audience. And it doesn't pressure a response. But this, what the avoidant does. It demands a reaction. It thrives on your emotional energy, even if that energy is negative, even if it comes in the form of anger, confusion, frustration. Because to them, your reaction, any reaction, is proof that they still exist in your inner world. And the tragedy is, They don't even realize how transparent they've become, how obvious their pattern is. They think they're being vulnerable, but they're being exposed. They think they're winning you back, but they're only confirming why you left. And yet, there's a part of you that still aches, that still wants the apology to be real, that still wants to believe this is the moment the story rewrites itself, that finally, all the pain was worth it. But Stoicism invites you to separate longing from logic, to ask, if this apology were genuine, would it come only after silence? Would it come only when they feared losing control? Would it come with pressure, with urgency, with guilt tripping? Real accountability doesn't sound like a script. It sounds like action. It looks like change that doesn't depend on whether or not you reply. It looks like someone doing the work in solitude, not crafting emotional monologues at midnight. And most importantly, it looks like someone who respects your boundaries, not someone who tests them under the guise of reconnection. So when the avoidant offers their carefully worded confession, examine the energy behind it. Does it feel grounded? Or does it feel like a grab for attention? Does it feel humbling, or does it feel performative? Does it honor your healing, or does it try to reverse it? That's the difference. That's the clarity you need to break the cycle. Because here's the truth. Real love never arrives disguised as pressure. It doesn't guilt you for walking away. It doesn't shame you for healing. And it certainly doesn't rush you back into a dynamic that once made you question your worth. What you're hearing is not an apology, it's a trigger test. And your ability to remain unshaken is the final proof that you've grown, that you're no longer addicted to emotional drama, that you're no longer available for empty promises dressed up as epiphanies. And if you needed permission, here it is. You don't owe anyone a response just because they found the right words too late. You don't have to explain your silence. You don't have to justify your peace. And you certainly don't have to entertain a performance that exists only to soothe their ego. Because here's what Stoicism teaches us. Closure is not given, it's chosen. And if you choose to move forward without engaging, without explaining, without validating their story, you've chosen the path of self-honoring. That is your power. That is your peace. That is your freedom. And they can't manipulate that unless you invite them back in. So hold your line, trust your body. Listen to the quiet wisdom that tells you something's off, even when the words sound perfect. That's your intuition. That's your healing. That's the result of every sleepless night, every boundary you rebuilt, every journal entry you cried through. And now you're here, standing at the edge of the old pattern, being invited back in under the sweetest disguise yet, but you know better. You see through it, you've become immune to the noise. Because the apology that follows your silence isn't proof of love. It's proof of panic. And no matter how pretty the words, the motive reveals the truth. So trust yourself. You've earned this clarity. You've fought for this calm. And the next chapter of your life doesn't need a recycled beginning. It needs a brand new story. A story that doesn't start with an apology. A story that doesn't include emotional games. A story where your peace isn't up for negotiation. That's love Stoic living. That's the reward for staying true to yourself, even when your heart was tempted to believe again. This isn't just about them. This is about you, about reclaiming the space you once filled with someone else's chaos. About choosing consistency over chemistry, depth over drama, truth over triggers. And when you make that choice again and again, you don't just heal, you transcend, you rise, you evolve, and no apology, no matter how poetic, can ever pull you back down again. 4. The performance of change. There's a moment that feels almost surreal when the avoidant who once treated your emotions like an inconvenience starts showing up as everything you ever hoped they would be. They start speaking in a tone you begged for months ago. Their eyes hold an intensity that once only belonged to your imagination. They remember small details, quote old conversations, say things like, "I've changed. I'm not who I used to be." And suddenly, it feels like the entire relationship is being rewritten. Like this is the chapter where things finally make sense. But pause. Because this moment isn't the miracle it appears to be. It's not a breakthrough. It's a performance. And like all performances, it has a script, an audience, and a purpose. That purpose isn't love. It's access. Because when you finally became unavailable to their inconsistency, when you stopped responding to breadcrumbs, when you no longer gave them the emotional highs and lows they fed off, they didn't evolve, they adapted. An adaptation in this case looks like mirroring. They mirror the version of themselves you always dreamed of. The emotionally intelligent one, the consistent one, the warm, available, grounded one. But it's not who they are. It's who they know you want them to be. This is where Stoicism becomes your weapon. Because Stoicism teaches us to observe patterns, not performances. To measure change not by the words someone uses when they want us back, but by the actions they take when they have nothing to gain. Real change is slow. It's quiet. It doesn't need an audience. It doesn't need validation. It exists whether you're watching or not. And most importantly, it honors boundaries instead of testing them. But what the avoidant does here is not real change. It's shape-shifting. It's psychological survival. And it works because you still have a part of you that wants to believe, a part of you that waited so long for this version of them to show up. But ask yourself, if they had this capacity all along, why did it take your absence to bring it out? If this emotional awareness was always inside them, why did they only access it after you started healing? The truth is, this isn't a breakthrough. It's a response to your detachment, a reaction to the ego injury they felt when they realized you were no longer under their emotional control. And when you mistake that reaction for transformation, you re-enter the cycle, the emotional yo-yo, the hot and cold confusion, the slow erosion of your self-trust. This is why the performance is so dangerous, because it mimics healing. It mimics growth. It mimics everything your heart ever begged for. But beneath the surface, nothing has changed. Their triggers are still intact. Their patterns are still dormant. Their self-awareness is still limited. The only thing that's different now is the costume. And you are the stage. Your empathy, your patience, your hope. These are the tools they use to sustain the act. But eventually the mask slips. It always does, because the performance was never meant to last. It was designed to regain access. And once access is restored, once they feel safe in your presence again, once they sense that you've started to soften, their nervous system relaxes, the urgency fades, and the old patterns return. Not in a dramatic explosion, but in small, dismissive moments. Missed texts, emotional distance, subtle invalidations. And before you know it, you're right back in the emotional limbo you worked so hard to escape. This is the cost of confusing presentation with transformation, of confusing emotional language with emotional labor, of confusing desire with devotion. A love Stoic knows the difference. She doesn't fall for sweet words whispered under stress. She watches for the patterns that show up when no one's performing. She doesn't romanticize potential. She honors reality. And she doesn't interpret a grand re-entrance as a sign of love. She sees it as a test of her boundaries, a test of her nervous system, a test of whether she still abandons herself for a fantasy. So ask yourself, what are they really offering? A future or a temporary role in their latest ego drama? Are they coming back to love you or to be loved by you in a way that makes them feel significant again? Is this about mutual growth, or is it about restoring a dynamic where they held the emotional upper hand? Because if someone truly changed, they wouldn't need to prove it to you. They wouldn't show up uninvited, delivering grand speeches about self-discovery. They would have honored your distance. They would have done the work in your absence. They would be living the change, not performing it. And if their growth requires your participation, your forgiveness, your emotional labor, then it's not growth, it's dependency. Stoicism reminds us we do not respond to intensity, we respond to integrity. That love is not proven by how someone reappears, but by how they behave when the spotlight is off, by how they respect our space, by how they sustain their evolution, not flash it in moments of desperation. So, when you find yourself standing at the edge of that familiar temptation, the one that whispers, maybe it's real this time, remember this. The performance of change is always louder than real change. Real change is quiet, consistent, respectful, and it doesn't demand an audience. It doesn't need to re-enter your life to validate its existence. And when you confuse a show of vulnerability for a shift in character, you trade your hard-earned peace for another round of emotional instability. Don't do that to yourself. Not after how far you've come. Not after all the nights you spent rewriting your worth. Not after rebuilding your nervous system from the chaos they left behind. You owe yourself more than a recycled script. You owe yourself more than a story that keeps restarting with the same antagonist. You deserve a love that doesn't arrive in costume, that doesn't require a breakdown to be expressed, that doesn't vanish when things get close. You deserve a love that is calm, stable, grounded. A love that doesn't need to be chased or decoded. A love that reflects the growth you fought for. So when the actor shows up, ready to play the role of the one who finally gets it, let the curtain fall. Let the show end and walk off the stage you never asked to be part of. Choose your reality over their role play. Choose your peace over their panic. Choose your future over their familiarity. Because the performance may be convincing, but your healing is real, and it's not worth sacrificing, not for applause, not for closure, not for anything. If this part of the message resonates, hit that like button and comment number 1 below. And if you're ready to keep unlearning the old and stepping fully into your love stoic self, make sure you subscribe, because in the next part, we'll explore the moment they flip the narrative and try to make you feel like the problem. It's where shame gets planted, but it's also where your discernment gets stronger than ever. Stay tuned. This is where it gets personal. 5. Flipping the narrative, making you the villain. This is the turning point. The moment where everything you've built, your clarity, your detachment, your commitment to peace, gets tested in the most manipulative way yet. Because once they realize that the emotional performance didn't bring you back, once your silence stays firm, once your boundaries don't bend under the weight of their romanticized regret, they flip the script. Suddenly, you're the cold one. You're the selfish one. You're the person who never really cared. They say things like, I guess I didn't mean that much to you. So you just gave up, huh? Wow. It's crazy how fast people move on. What you're witnessing is not heartbreak. It's not sincerity. It's ego in crisis. It's the avoidant trying to regain control, not through charm, but through guilt. Because when the soft tactics fail, they switch to projection. They start assigning blame, rewriting the story, framing themselves as the one who tried, as the one who's being unfairly abandoned. And if you're not grounded in truth, it can work. It can make you question your boundaries. It can make you wonder, maybe I was too harsh. Maybe I should give them another chance. Maybe, just maybe, their pain is finally real. But here's what you need to understand. This isn't about love. It's about leverage. They don't want resolution. They want reaction. They want to see if they can still make you flinch. Because if you defend yourself, if you explain, if you get emotionally involved in clearing your name, they win. You've stepped back into the game. You've re-entered the dynamic. You've handed over your peace in exchange for their temporary attention. This is how they test your boundaries, not just with sweet words, but with guilt, with shame, with emotional accusations disguised as heartbreak. And if you're not vigilant, it works, because shame is sticky. It targets the part of you that still wants to be seen as good, as kind, as loving. And they know that. They know you've always been the one who tried to understand, to communicate, to heal things. So they use that strength against you. They make you doubt the very clarity you fought so hard to claim. But a love Stoic knows better. She knows that guilt is not proof of wrongdoing. That being labeled cold for protecting your peace is not a reason to abandon your progress. She knows that a secure person doesn't punish someone for choosing themselves. Only an insecure ego does that. So when the avoidant flips the narrative, don't take the bait. Don't engage. Don't argue. Don't explain. Your silence is not cruelty. It's your boundary. Your stillness is not detachment. It's your clarity. And their pain is not your responsibility. Because here's the truth. If they were truly heartbroken, they wouldn't weaponize their sadness. They would sit with it, learn from it, grow through it. But avoidants don't process pain like secure people. They externalize it, they project it, and when their internal discomfort becomes too heavy to hold, they try to hand it to you. That's what this narrative flip is. A handoff. A transfer of emotional weight. But you don't have to accept it. You can see it for what it is, a manipulation tactic, a last-ditch effort to reestablish control. Because in their world, losing control is the deepest wound. It's not the absence of love that hurts them. It's the absence of relevance. And when you stop reacting, you become a mirror they can't use, a space they can't fill, a presence they can no longer dominate. That's what triggers the story reversal. Because if they can't pull you back with sweetness, they'll try to drag you back with shame. But Stoicism reminds us we are not responsible for how others interpret our boundaries. We are only responsible for upholding them. And when someone calls you selfish for choosing peace, when they label you cold for protecting your heart, they are not revealing who you are. They are revealing who they need you to be to stay in control. So don't bend. Don't explain. Don't defend a version of yourself you've already outgrown. Let them say what they need to say. Let them create their fiction. You have nothing to prove. Your truth is not up for debate. You know who you are. You know what you endured. You know the nights you spent breaking over someone who refused to show up for you. And now that you're whole again, you do not owe anyone access just because they feel entitled to your softness. Let that be a reminder. Their story is not your responsibility. Their pain is not your project. Their regret is not your invitation. And when you hold that line, you reclaim something deeper than just emotional safety. You reclaim your sense of self. You affirm that your healing is not conditional on how others perceive it. You make peace with being misunderstood because you'd rather be seen as distant than be pulled back into dysfunction. And that's what Stoicism teaches us. To value reality over reputation. To choose alignment over approval. To let go of the need to be seen as good if it means being dragged back into emotional chaos. So the next time they try to flip the narrative to paint you as the villain in their story of loss, remember this. You're not cold. You're clear. You're not heartless. You're healed. And you're not abandoning them. You're honoring yourself. And the version of you that used to shrink in the face of guilt, she's gone. The version that used to over-explain, over-apologize, overcompensate, she doesn't live here anymore. You've stepped into a new era, an era where your silence is sacred, where your boundaries are unshakable, where your love is no longer up for negotiation. And no matter how many versions of the story they spin, it doesn't touch you because you're not in the story anymore. You closed the book and started writing your own. This is the moment you remember your strength. You remember the truth, and you refuse to let anyone, no matter how sweet their sorrow sounds, rewrite your peace. You've come too far. You've unlearned too much. And you've become someone who no longer chases clarity through conflict, because you already have it inside you. Rooted, real, unshakable. Let them narrate, let them perform, let them spiral. You're not cold. You're conscious. You're not detached. You're divine. And when you stop reacting, you don't just reclaim your story, you end theirs. 6. Why this trick hurts more than the silence. There's a specific kind of pain that comes not from being ignored, but from being seen only after you've stopped needing to be. It's the ache of realizing that your worth was never recognized when it mattered, only when it served someone else's agenda. This final trick, the avoidance emotionally charged return after your healing, hurts more than the silence ever did, because it doesn't come during your heartbreak. It comes after you've stitched yourself back together, after you've rebuilt a life that no longer revolves around their inconsistency, after your nervous system has learned how to feel safe again without them. And suddenly, just as you're starting to believe in your own peace, they knock with a message, a voice note, a memory, a confession. And it catches you off guard, not because you want them back, but because it touches something sacred, the version of you that once cried into your pillow, wishing this very moment would happen. You see, this trick doesn't reopen the same wound. It slices into a healed one. And that's why it cuts so deeply. Because now, the cost of going back isn't just emotional confusion, it's betrayal. Betrayal of the woman you've become. Betrayal of the silence you honored. Betrayal of the clarity you fought for. And when they come back with all the right words, the illusion is so complete that even your body doesn't know how to respond. It remembers the old desire, the old hunger, the old ache. But this time, it's laced with something new. Wisdom. That wisdom whispers, "This is familiar, but it's not safe. This sounds right, but it's not true. This feels like hope, but it's just a trick." And that's where the real damage happens. Not in what they say, but in what you wanted it to mean. You wanted this to be the moment everything made sense. You wanted the pain to have a purpose. You wanted the chaos to resolve into something beautiful. But Stoicism reminds us, life doesn't promise us closure in the way we hope. It gives us lessons, not guarantees. Growth, not guarantees. And if you fall for the final illusion, you don't just repeat the cycle, you deepen the scar. Because now, your intuition knew, your body signaled, your peace resisted, but your hope, that stubborn ember, still believed. And the aftermath of falling for this trick? It's brutal, not because of them, but because of you. Because you knew. And that's where the shame creeps in. That's where you start to blame yourself. Why did I respond? Why did I believe them again? Why did I let them in when I was finally okay? But here's what you need to understand. This was never about weakness. It was about programming. About how we're taught to associate emotional confession with emotional maturity. About how we've been conditioned to romanticize pain, to see longing as proof of love, to see absence as depth. But love's Stoic wisdom teaches something else. It teaches that real love doesn't need to perform. True change doesn't arrive when it's convenient. It arrives in solitude, in consistency, in silence. It shows up without needing access to you. And if their transformation requires your re-entry, it's not transformation, it's ego recovery. They're not returning to love you. They're returning to feel powerful again because your detachment is a mirror. It reflects their irrelevance. And they can't handle that. So they use the last tool they have, emotional vulnerability. Not the kind that transforms, the kind that manipulates, that rehearses, that tests. And when you fall for it, Even just a little, you give them exactly what they need. Confirmation. Confirmation that they still live in your mind, that their absence still hurts, that their words still move you. But Stoicism teaches you to sit with your emotional storms, not react to them. To honor your clarity more than your cravings. To trust your intuition even when your heart wants to believe in fairy tales. Because this is the trap that keeps so many women stuck. The illusion that this time is different, that this time they're serious, that this time you're not being fooled. But if you listen closely, you'll hear the same patterns. The same self-centered sorrow. The same refusal to take real accountability. They still don't name what they did to you. They still don't acknowledge the damage they caused. They still don't offer real repair. And that's how you know it's not real. It's just a scene, a test, a trick. And you don't have to fall for it. You've healed too much, grown too deep, seen too clearly. Your nervous system isn't a playground for someone else's insecurity. Your heart isn't a stage for recycled apologies. Your peace isn't a currency they can bargain with. So what do you do when the trick arrives? You breathe. You anchor. You return to your truth. You remember the version of them that disappeared when you needed them most. The version that ignored your boundaries. The version that punished your emotions. Because that's the real them. Not the performer. Not the poet. Not the person who misses you so much. The real them shows up under pressure. And when the pressure returns, when they feel safe again, they will retreat again. Disappear again. Trigger again. Because this isn't love. This is the final gasp of ego trying to reassert itself in a space it no longer belongs. And when you refuse to respond, when you refuse to perform your old role, when you refuse to be the one who makes sense of their confusion, that's when the cycle finally breaks. Not with a dramatic goodbye, not with closure, with silence, with neutrality, with stillness. That's your power. And yes, it's hard. It's lonely. It's heavy. But it's also holy because it's real. And real is what heals. If this resonates, if you feel yourself stepping deeper into your truth, go ahead and like this video and drop number 1 in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe because the next part is where everything connects. It's where you realize this wasn't about them. It was about the wound they mirrored, the lesson you needed, the closure you give yourself. You're not just surviving anymore. You're becoming a love stoic woman. Sovereign, self-trusting, and absolutely untouchable. Final reflection. So here you are after the silence, after the illusion, after the trick, standing in the quiet aftermath, not of their actions, but of your awakening. This isn't just about them anymore. It never really was. It's about what you allowed, what you tolerated, what you explained away in the name of love. It's about the years you spent translating mixed signals into meaning, mistaking inconsistency for depth, and holding space for someone who only visited when it served their comfort. And now that you've made it through the storm, you can finally see what you couldn't when you were in it. It was never love. It was never connection. It was control dressed in chemistry, ego disguised as desire, abandonment packaged as passion. The entire dance was orchestrated around one goal: to keep you emotionally dependent, close enough to long for them, far enough to never reach them. That's not intimacy. That's manipulation. And the most dangerous part, it mirrored your own wound. That wound of wanting to be chosen, of believing that if you could just love harder, sacrifice more, wait longer, then one day you'd be enough. But you were never not enough. You were simply trying to bloom in a space that was never fertile to begin with. You were trying to build a foundation on shifting sand. And when you stopped doing that, when you chose to walk, not out of anger, but out of alignment, that's when the game broke. That's when they panicked. Because avoidants don't fear distance. They thrive in it. What they fear is irrelevance. And your silence made them irrelevant. Your stillness stripped their power. Your healing exposed their lack of growth. And that's what the final dirty trick is all about, regaining a foothold in your emotional world. They don't want to fix the past. They want to know they still have a future in your nervous system, that they can still stir your peace, that their memory can still make your chest tighten. But not anymore. Because now you see clearly. And with that clarity comes a kind of peace that doesn't shout, it doesn't post, it doesn't need to prove anything. It simply lives. Quiet, steady, rooted, real. That is Stoicism in love. That is the love Stoic woman. She who no longer entertains pain as proof of depth, who no longer chases closure through chaos, who no longer validates her worth through being chosen by someone who lacks the capacity to choose themselves. She chooses differently now. She chooses stillness over reactivity. She chooses truth over fantasy. She chooses detachment not as avoidance, but as discernment. Because she finally understands love is not a transaction. It is not a reward you earn by breaking yourself down to fit someone else's limitations. It is not a performance. And it does not require an audience. Real love holds space. Real love communicates. Real love doesn't wait for silence to take action. And real love never arrives with ultimatums, guilt trips, or manipulation disguised as romance. So when they come back, because they will, and they press against the door you finally closed, they will be met with a version of you they've never encountered. The you that no longer flinches, no longer reacts, no longer bends. The you that doesn't respond to messages that once would have made you tremble. The you that doesn't chase clarity because she's already clear. And in that clarity, something profound happens. You stop needing them to acknowledge your pain. You stop craving the apology. You stop asking why because the answer no longer matters. What matters now is you without them. What you build in their absence. The way your body breathes easier when they're no longer in the room. That is the true reward. That is the healing no one can take from you. And that's what they never expected. They expected your anger, your arguments, your pain. But they didn't expect your evolution. They didn't expect your calm. They didn't expect you to find peace in the very place they once used as a battlefield. That's what disarms them. That's what terrifies them. Because emotional silence to an avoidant isn't rejection. It's a loss of dominance. And when they realize they can no longer provoke you, they're faced with a mirror they've spent their entire lives avoiding, the reflection of their own emptiness. And it is not your job to fix that. It is not your role to be their emotional rehab. You are not the one to teach them how to love. You were the lesson. And whether or not they learn it is no longer your concern. What matters is that you did. You learn to stop running after people who communicate through absence. You learn to stop making excuses for someone's inability to show up. You learned that depth is not defined by dysfunction. And now you move differently. You love differently. You relate differently. Because the person you are now would never accept what the old you settled for. And that growth didn't come from their return. It came from your refusal to go back. That's what Stoicism is in practice. Not the absence of feeling, but the mastery of it. The ability to sit with your grief and still not pick up what shattered you. The ability to witness their performance and still say, no. The ability to remember the old story and still choose a new ending. One where you are no longer the fixer, no longer the fantasy builder, no longer the mirror for someone who refused to look at their own reflection. This is your closure, not a conversation, not a final message, not even their accountability. It's you walking forward with nothing but your own self-trust as your compass. Because you've tasted freedom. You've built peace. You found safety in your own arms. And no illusion of love, not even one wrapped in the most poetic apology, can compare to that. Let them knock. Let them cry. Let them perform. You are not theirs to reach anymore. You are no longer the woman who bleeds just to keep the connection alive. You are the woman who chooses her wholeness, even when her heart remembers what it once longed for. And that choice, over and over again, is what ends the cycle. That choice is your revolution. That choice is your liberation. That choice is your final answer. You don't need to prove you've healed. You don't need to explain why you're not going back. You just need to keep walking calmly, quietly, powerfully, stoically, because this is the end of their game and the beginning of your reign.